So this video is going to take us through all the stages involved in making this commemorative platter, including the wood turning and the pyrography and the design. So it started with an email inquiry from someone I used to work with. Most of my projects do come from emails. I replied to this to say yes, I could make something, probably a platter, and then asked for some further details so that I could start experimenting. The response was for some photographs to arrive, and they were a little bit small and not quite the perspective that I would like. So I had a look on the internet, and instead of the car that was sent to me, I went for this one, which is the same model, just a few differences on the front, some indicators, some spotlights, and the registration plate. I also did a few trials using Paint Shop Pro, sepia, masking out the background, a vintage filter, and then switched to Microsoft Publisher to put the writing and get the size of the plate. I also did a couple of experiments with changing the Jupiter badge to show the date of birth and possibly the registration plate. Even the Jowett logo, I thought perhaps Noel, because that's who it's for, and his date of birth. But in the end, we left those alone. Printed out the templates back to front using Publisher. So I'm using word art, which allows me to get the right size and shape, and also allows me to flip it over to make it a mirror image. And then it's printed on an ordinary DeskJet printer. Very important that you use original quality ink and not the cheaper stuff available. So, using the Microsoft Publisher, because it's a circular plate, I'm going to insert a circle. Here we go. And the best way to get it to be a perfect circle is to type in the height and width. So I'm going to make it 20 centimeters. And then I can move this around to center it on the page. I don't want it filled in, so get rid of that. And then I'm going to put another circle inside to represent the inner part of the plate. Now these dimensions are not accurate for the project, but I've just done this as an example. So these are 14, and now I'm going to move this and watch for those crosshairs which show that it's centered relative to the other circle. So now I've got an area which I can put some writing between. So now I'm going to insert some word art which allows me to curve the writing around the circle. So here's the message given to me by Jess when she requested this plate. And when I first put it in, first of all, if I'm given the choice, I use a handwriting font. So I'm going to use Bradley Hand ITC. I'm going to make it bold because that will give a better imprint on the wood. It's not the right size, so I change shape. And if I use this one, give me the top half of a circle, or I can use this one. Let's just show you what this one does first. So if I set this to 14, which is the diameter of the diameter of the inside circle, there we go, and then pull it across. What that one does, what that shape does, is to put the writing on top of the circle. Now I find the other version more useful. It doesn't look very good to start with, but we can adjust that in a minute. And what this one does is put the writing underneath a 20 centimetre circle, which I'm just defining now. Okay, and then just move it up to get it to line up with the circle. There's a little yellow marker which, when you pull it, shrinks the height of the text, and you can experiment with that until we get it right. Time to change the colour to black, and I'm going to make it quite a thick outline in black. Again, all that is to make sure there's plenty of ink there to go onto the wood when I transfer it. Okay. And now if I just move this across and line it up, you can see that the top of the letters are just touching the outside circle, which I don't really want, so I'm going to make the diameter of the writing circle 19.2 19.5 instead of 20. So there's a little gap between the writing and the circle. Looking for the crosshairs again, there they are. So that will be centered now. And still a couple of things I could do to it. I'm going to take it down a bit more, 19.2, 19.2. There we go. And just shrink the text a little bit so it's not quite so tall. There we go. That's beginning to look like I would want it to be. Just bring it down a little bit further and center it once again. There's the crosshairs. And then the second half of the writing, do the same again. Insert word art. Just start with any shape to start with. Type in the message and then go through the same routines. I will choose the Bradley Hand ITC, which is the handwriting script. The reason for that is it's a little bit more forgiving when you're pyrographing than something as formal as this Arial script. Okay, so here we go. We'll just choose the Bradley Hand. Apologies if you can't see these things very clearly. The resolution of the video is less than the resolution of my computer screen. I'm just changing the radius to match the top radius. There we go. And then pull it up. Whoops, I've accidentally picked up the circle instead of the text. Nope, still not got it. There we go. Move it across. Put it into the circle. find the little yellow marker and pull, and that gets the text looking something like I want it. So again, change the colour to black, make sure there's no shadow on it, and make it a little bit smaller, bring it up and centre it. Okay, I have to admit I don't know why the crosshairs didn't come up this time, but not to worry, we're getting there. I'm just trying to pick up the text again and make it a little bit bolder. There we go. And that's by giving it a heavier outline. Right, now it's beginning to look the same as the top. At the moment, the text, the top text and the bottom text, I think are too close together. So I need to do something about that. And right, I've selected the text. So now I'm going to put a few spaces in front of the text and then match them with a few spaces behind, and that'll create a gap in the centre. And then do the same again. A few spaces in front, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Same behind, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And I just feel that looks a bit nicer, that the top and bottom halves are separated. So now it's time to bring in the car. So I won't do all this, but I'll just show. If you get an image, you can copy it and paste it in place, and then shrink it to some size, move it into place, and you can see the rectangle around the car is blocking out some of the lines. So the thing to do is the thing called send backwards, and send it to the back so that the circle is in front of the rectangle. Then I'm going to highlight the entire picture and rotate it, flip horizontal. And that's the thing which puts it back to front, which means that when I print it, I can just rub it onto my wood. Having done all the design work in the house, it's time to move into the workshop. I've got a 12-inch blank, a rippled sycamore from Snainton, which looks very clean, but there is actually a flaw in it that we'll find out once I start turning. You see me wearing these things, very, very good at shutting out noise, and they connect to DAB and to Bluetooth, which allows me to listen to the radio. So just drilling a 6mm hole for a screw chuck, trying to keep it as straight as possible, and then screwing in this, one of my favourite ways of holding things at the moment. Finally, a little bit of router mat to give some extra purchase. There it is. It's a 3-inch screw truck, and it's made by Kronos. And then there are 4 screw holes, so I'm just putting in 4 screws, and I use the Craig screws, which have got square drives and a self-tapping. You can use them over and over again, and I do. So once it's secure, it goes onto the lathe. I'm just screwing it in now into the headstock. There we go. Remember to take the lock off. And checking the speed, probably working about 750 RPM to start with. And using an ordinary bowl gouge, 1/2 inch. I think it's the one that I bought when I first started. It's a record, and it's a 45-degree bevel. It's not swept back or anything special. When I'm working on something like this, I find it easier just to swivel the head round a bit, and there's a detent there at 30 degrees, I think. And just lock it in place. It just gives me, allows me to move around. I've got a fairly small workshop, so I haven't got a lot of room for manoeuvre. Just a close-up of the bowl gouge. As I say, it's a record, 45-degree grind on it. I think it's the one that I had from my starter pack of 6 chisels, which I bought when I started turning about 12 years ago, in fact. Okay, so starting the pull cut. Important to start at the outside here on a large bowl, a large pattern like this, and minimise the chattering that might go on. And because I want as much picture area as possible, the rim is going to be quite shallow, but wide enough to take the writing that I'm putting on as well. So I'm just checking here to see what I'm going to put a spigot on here to hold the wood when I reverse it, and I'm going to use an 80mm jaws. Prefer to use a spigot than putting a recess in for a couple of reasons. One is, everybody tells me it's a much stronger way of holding the wood. The other is that if I put a recess in, then I'm reducing the thickness of the plate at the bottom, and hence reducing its strength. Because I'm making this very, very close to the ideal diameter of the jaws, I don't need a particularly deep spigot, so I'm not going to lose very much wood. And also I'm going to make the base slightly concave, which allows me to have a little bit more depth on the spigot without particularly losing a great deal of wood to accommodate it. Just using a parting tool there to mark the diameter of the spigot. A little bit more refining of the edge. And just pulling out this base. Another check on measurement. Now this time I'm looking to see what kind of diameter I can get so that I can get the picture on the other side as large as possible. I'm looking for about a 9-inch diameter circle picture on the other side. So I don't want to start taking the curve up from the base too early. Now this parting tool is a double-ended tool, and the other side of it is a skew, which just allows me to go in and give a slight chamfer to the spigot. Another check on size. There's the parting tool version, and then when you reverse it round, it's got a round skew. Just sharpening up the bowl gouge. Got a Pro Edge, Sorby Pro Edge sharpener. And off we go again, just get this as the right shape and the right size. Going in from the edge there so that I don't splinter the edge by going in the reverse direction. Just taking it as far as it begins to curve upwards there. And then come down from the other side and blend the two cuts together. Okay. Check it for smoothness and any ridges. Just turn up the speed a little bit and take a finer cut as hopefully as a finishing cut. I think we're up to about 1300 RPM at the moment. And that should do. So next we're going to sand it, and it's just the outer curve part that I'm going to sand. I won't be bothering with the base because that will need to go back on the lathe and have the spigot taken off. Remembered to put my helmet on. It's an Air Shield Pro, and put the ear defenders back on as well to catch up on my radio program. Turn the speed down, probably to 400, and I'm just going to sand this curve part here. Now I will go through all the grits from this is 120. Go through all the grits up to maybe 320, possibly 400. but I won't show you all those. Not the most fascinating of video. So that's done. It's coming off now, unscrewing it from the headstock. There we go. Next we're going to put it back to reverse it on a chuck. And say these are 80mm jaws. Just putting it back to its normal orientation because I need to take the edge off here, and my tool rest doesn't extend far enough if it's at an angle, at least not on a 12-inch piece like this. Just remember that I need to put my face shield on because I've probably seen some chips flying off. There we go. And once I've got the edge done, I'm going to turn it back to 30 degrees to make it easier to access. So I'm just squaring this off a little bit, but when you're turning something 12-inch diameter, it's best to work on the outside first, because if you take the centre away, it will tatter. I'm just shaping the outside to a sort of a round lip, and then beginning to take the inside away. Just measuring to see if I can get the diameter that I'm after. And then, because I want quite a large base to put the picture on, this is quite a deep curve into the ball. Certainly deeper than I would choose to have if it was just a straightforward ball. I quite like to put a little rim round to accentuate the change in contour. And the centre for pyrography plates that I do, I usually like to have them convex. So I've got to go down far enough to get rid of the screw hole, but I haven't got to go down too far to turn it into a donut. Sharpen up again. Nearly finished now, so I'm going to finish it off with a flat scraper. So just raise the tool rest a little so that I'm angling down when I'm scraping. And this is quite a chunky scraper. Its bevel is 80 degrees. It's about 1.25 inches across, and I find it very useful for giving it a wide sweeping surface like this one, a smooth finish. There's a picture. It's a crown, and it's not quite square at the end, but very close. Just check I'm not getting too thin. And then a bit of fine detail here I'm using a spindle gouge, the Henry Taylor one again. It's one of my favourite tools. Just shear scraping to refine that curve. There we go. And again, just getting as far down as I can into the bowl. And a little bit of shear scraping there, just to blend it down a little bit further. Okay, back to the scraper, just to get it as smooth as I can. Finish off with a 120 grit 70mm sanding arbor. I'll go through all the grits. I'm not going to show you. A little bit of hand sanding there just to get into the detail. Onto the pyrography, I use a Peter Child machine. I've used it for years. It's the only one I've got. And I almost always work between 2 and 3, and very, very rarely much more than that. I use thick wire, which I flatten out on a vise. That's the camera rocking, not the vise. And then with a pair of pliers, just bend it over, pinch the end to create a little nib, straighten it out as much as I can, open the legs out, and then snip it off with a pair of wire snippers. And then you've got to get that into the holder, into the pen, which I find very, very tricky. I've probably made the legs on this a little bit short, but never mind. So the wire needs to go between there's a little holder and then the screw. Make sure they're tight. Okay. On the right you can see the pack that comes with the Peter Child, which includes a spoon tip, and that's the one tip that I find really useful that comes in the pack. I'll be showing you my using that later on, but what I'm doing here is just filing it down to a sort of a skew shape, about 30 degrees, so that it's quite a good point. And that allows me to either shade on the flat side or turn it round and create some very fine lines using the sharp point. To be very careful when you are filing, else that happens if you go too far. Then you have to start again. You can get a little coupler here, so I've got the option to use 2 styluses at the same time. So the next stage is to transfer the design from the paper onto the wood and then pyrograph it. So we'll flip it first on the printer so that it's back to front. And then what I usually do is tape the design upside down onto the plate, the wood. Just make sure it's in position. Trying to get the car just above that bark inclusion so that it doesn't interfere with the picture of the car. The reason I put the tape on is, with it being quite a big picture, I don't want it to move while I'm rubbing it on, and also I like to just get that in place and then dampen the wood so that the ink rubs into the wood and gives me a fairly clear picture. It won't be brilliant because it is a black and white filtered picture rather than one with really strong lines, but it should be good enough for me to work from. And it's quite important to dampen the entire area, including the bits that are not currently going to be pyrographed, because this will raise the grain slightly, and if you only do it in a small patch you can get an unpleasant effect when you come to put sanding sealer on and polish. So that should be nice and damp now. Just ordinary water. Tape that into place. And then using an ordinary soft pencil, I'm just going to rub and rub and rub until I make an impression on the wood. Rubbing and rubbing. I'm just going to fast forward a bit until this is done. There we go. Now, without taking all the masking tape off, just check that it looks workable. That's not a bad outline, it's a little bit faint, but just put that back down and go over an area that looked particularly faint. That's why I kept the tape on the other side. But that should do it, so I'll take that off. There's still a couple of areas that are a little bit fainter than I would want, so I'm just going to put them in by pencil, just looking at the original drawing. It's a lot easier to correct things if they're in pencil than it is once I start pyrographing. So I'm quite keen to get the lines that I want to be there visible at this stage. Okay, so now we move on to the pyrography pen. To start with, I'm using the bent wire version. It's not burning very well, so I'm just going to take a little bit of abrasive and clean the tip. They do tend to build up carbon, particularly when you're burning over pencil. So I'll probably clean them every couple of minutes. And very steady away, of course. If I did the whole thing like this, it's going to take a couple of hours, so this is 10 times faster than reality. Still quite slow. It does look like my head might rock off. So I go up to 20 times faster, and I actually recorded this using time lapse, so it only takes a couple of frames every second. So gradually working around, moving the plate. While I'm doing all this, I refer to a black and white and to some different filter effects, just to get a rough idea of the lines and also the shading and the effect I'm trying to achieve. I even did a couple of copies of pyrography on the internet to see how they'd done it. So it's going to be a slow process, so you've got 3 screens going here in time-lapse photography, and concentrating on the front, but moving around, getting the lines in place, trying to put some of the shading in, keep standing back and looking and getting the effects that I'm after. The radiator here I was quite pleased with this one. The number plate, if you remember, that's an addition, so that's just gone in by eye really, and there's quite a few things that are additions. If you remember, I put 2 extra headlights on and some indicators, and the wheel is different to the picture that I'm actually using. So that's 20 times faster, and it's 3 sets of video. So we've just gone through a couple of hours of pyrography there. You notice here I'm using, well, you won't notice, but I am using a spoonbill point. Very, very good for getting fine shading effects. And it's being held in the new Peter Child pen, which is certainly easier to grip. I don't know what the advantage of the different holder at the end is, but it's much nicer to use than the old version. So just finishing off the shading around the outlines, trying to get it to look like a metallic car. Little bit of shading of the ground, which I'll come back to. So next up, I need to put the 2 badges on the design, and if you remember, I'm going to change Jowett Jupiter into his chap's date of birth, get rid of those black triangles and adjust the writing so that it's squarer. I'm just going over the outline here in pencil because it needs to come through fairly clearly. Cut that out. Dampen the wood a little, and then I'm not going to bother taping this down because it's only a small piece. Just rub this on. There we go. And then the top badge is no alterations made to it. So the same thing, dampen it a little, cut the template out, rub it on. Again, this is 20 times faster than reality. Just checking it's gone through. And a little faint, but it's clear enough for me to proceed. I like to have the original nearby so that I can keep referring to it. And again, here I'm using the the spoon tip, but I'm using it sort of reversed so that I've got a very sharp edge at the end of the spoon, and that allows me to get the very fine lines that are in this logo. Now you'll notice that I'm moving the plate around almost all the time. I always like to work from the right hand side of whatever I'm pyrographing, because I'm right-handed, particularly with curves. I find very difficult unless I'm on the right side of the curve. The lettering's quite fine, and obviously important that that's as accurate as possible. Now I'm going to do the feathers and the wings around the outside. There we go. Now the bottom badge. Now this is a reverse pyrography, whereas I'm actually burning the background rather than the writing. And I'm also missing some bits out and straightening up the writing from the template that I was able to produce on the computer. I quite like the reverse effect with pyrography. Okay, so again some very fine lines here, but I'm still using the end of the spoon tip, which gives me a good, thin, accurate line. Okay. There. Now I'm putting the writing on round the outside, so taping the paper in place and rubbing the stencil on. Because this isn't a picture, because it's writing, it comes through very clearly, having been printed in bold on the paper. So we're still working in time lapse here. Sort of wish I could do it this quickly. You might just notice a block of wood in the top of this picture, which is there so that I can rest my hand on the block about the same height as the paper, just to give me some stability as I'm working. It's really important to have your hand nice and stable as you go through something like this. Obviously it doesn't matter to me that I'm working on the writing upside down. That's the most direct way to reach it, so that's how it is. Again, moving the plate all the time so that I can burn from the right hand side of the lines I'm burning. And working my way around. I think that little gap there was probably me cleaning the tip again. As I say, I tend to do that every couple of minutes or whenever I notice the burning not being as effective. Just adding a little bit more shading to the background. I'm trying to create enough shading to make that bark inclusion look like it's part of the ground. Now I'm going to put some cellulose sanding sealer on with a brush and then rubbed in with a paper tissue. It's important that you do rub it in, you don't just leave it brushed, because it needs to be fairly smooth so that when it comes to waxing it, it will be smooth. So rubbing it in there, and I think I'm giving it a second coat. And the mix is 50-50 sealer and thinner. I'll keep it in a little fairy liquid bottle. Okay, so now I'm going to remount the plate on a vacuum chuck. I've got a Simon Hope vacuum chuck, and the first thing to do is to put a pipe through the headstock. There we go. And then this is held in place with a little leather washer and a brass screw. Tighten that up to give it an airtight lock on it. And then here's the vacuum cup, which screws on. I say this is a Simon Hope, and it's got its own dedicated vacuum pump. I think he's stopped making them now, I'm not sure. I bought this a couple of years ago. So to start with, I'm just going to put that on there and bring up the tailstock and treat it as a jam chuck. And if I didn't have a vacuum chuck, I would make something like this to finish it off. That's running fairly smoothly. Okay. The reason that I don't take the chucking point off before pyrographing is that I've had a few disasters where I needed to reshape or take some of the writing off, and haven't been able to put it back on the lathe easily, so I usually leave a way of holding it until the main pyrography is done. So at the moment this is being held between centres, and if I didn't have a vacuum chuck, I would take this right down as far as I could to the centre, and then just take the nib off with a chisel. But it's very nice to have the vacuum. I don't use it a great deal, but it is very good for finishing off the underneath of things like this. So now it's being held totally on the vacuum. I think it's running about 750 RPM. Always fairly careful not to nudge it at the centre there. I think I'm taking this off with a, looks like a spindle gouge, 1/2 inch spindle gouge. Henry Taylor one of my favourites. Oh, we're getting there now. This underside is obviously is concave, and doing it that way means that the spigot hasn't cost me very much wood, and also having a spigot instead of a recess means that I'm not left with a hole that limits the thickness of the plate that I've got at the centre. So there we go. Let's just check that, just to check it has got the concave that I wanted. It's hopefully fairly smooth now. We've got rid of the main ridges. I'm just finishing off with a scraper. This is an almost square flat scraper, 80-degree bevel on it, and I find it a good way. It's a very thick, solid tool. I find it a good way of getting the smooth surface there. Okay. And then sand this, starting with a 120 grit. Using a 70mm arbor here, which I prefer if I can use it to the 50mm one. Again, they're Simon Hope versions. Quick check. You can just see the other end of that bark inclusion there, which runs right across the wood. A little bit annoying, but it adds character to the piece. You can also see the rippling there. Getting rid of the sharp edge. And then I would go through, I did go through all the grits up to 320, I think. I don't think I've videoed them all. I'm sure there's nothing much added by showing you lots of grits. This is still on the vacuum, so just turning the vacuum off now, and then pop, and off it comes. I always like to try and put my little trademark on pieces I do, or at least if they're any good. And same method as everything else, just rub a transfer on, and this says oldfern.co.uk. Again, a little bit faint, but it's clear enough to me. That is the address of my website, and I do get people are given some of these things, and then they'll ring me up, or they'll come through the website later on. So it's a little bit of advertising, as well as showing who made it. There we go. Some sanding sealer on here. And again, putting it on with a brush. But then finishing it off with some paper towel. So then the final stage is to buff it, starting with Tripoli. I use wax now for sycamore. I did do one with oil, and it turns the wood much darker, and I want the contrast between the pyrography and the the almost white wood to be as strong as possible. So I wouldn't recommend oil. I also then, I haven't videoed it, but also did white diamond and finished with carnauba. And there we have the final article. Ready to go. Now, people often ask me how long these things take to do, and I've never really been able to tell them, but this time I'd got the video which has got a timer on it. So the planning, which is done here and there, odd tea breaks, over about 3-4 weeks, took a couple of hours probably. 30 minutes for printing and transferring to the wood and marking out. About an hour and 10 minutes of actual wood turning. And then the big one is the pyrography, which comes to 3 hours. So altogether, that project has taken 5 to 7 hours, all in. And on top of that, it's probably taken as much again to make this video. But it was interesting. At least interesting to make, and hopefully interesting to watch as well. Thank you.